Coogan's Bluff. I mean, what can you say about the movie other than a lot? Yeah, it's probably one of Clint Eastwood's most quintessential roles, and I don't want to say it's forgotten because it still remains influential. But if you're talking about Eastwood's early history, most people are going to point to the Dollars trilogy, followed by Dirty Harry, 1971. And yeah, you had Kelly's Heroes and When Eagles Dare and, Hang 'em High. Coogan's Bluff was a really awesome movie that I think more people remember today for how it influenced the TV show McCloud, which was a great show. I remember the Halloween episode with John Carradine as Dracula, but that's a sidebar. Coogan's Bluff, of course, is about a Arizona sheriff, Walt Coogan, who is chasing down a fugitive, and he goes from the wild, wild west of Arizona to the mean streets of New York City. You'd think there would be a lot of fish out of water stuff. Not so much, because Coogan is, by today's standards, we call it toxic masculinity. Back in 1968, it was just masculinity. And Coogan he considered the New York crowd a bunch of goofs. And the New York folks were your stereotypical hard-edged cops, hard-edged robbers, gritty street life. And Coogan had no time tolerance or patience for them. I think he kind of saw them as just being in the way. And he also bumps a little bit into some Andy Warhol Factory types, like dudes smoking weed and all that back in the day when that was a big no-no. And what happens is he kind of just barrels his way through everything, and he never really loses his edge or his toughness. And this is a pretty darn controversial movie for '68. I mean, it would get an R rating today. It's pretty, it pushes the envelope a little bit. By late '60s standards, this was definitely an R-rated film, which, is kind of surprising because as violent as his Westerns were, they weren't as provocative as Coogan's Bluff. And it's really a movie that's definitely worth checking out as a timepiece because it really gives you some insights into the shift in the motion picture industry in the late 1960s as it was becoming much more experimental. Like next year from when this movie was made, 68, 1969 would bring you Easy Rider, and you were also having other influential movies that were shaking things up, such as MASH in 1970 and Clockwork Orange in 1971, 72. And in terms of the modern action movie, the shift of, I don't know if I would call Coogan an anti-hero, but he's definitely not what you would call a character, a traditional cowboy with a white hat, like an old school John Wayne character. No, this is Coogan has his flaws. He's not always likable, and that's what makes him an intriguing, interesting character. You couldn't make a Walt Coogan today. You couldn't make a Dirty Harry Callahan today. Well, I mean, you could if you were doing independent films, but for studios, I would even say for the streaming services, they would probably take a character like this and say, he's too controversial. We don't want to do anything with him. And I could understand criticizing the character, maybe criticizing some of the elements of the film and criticizing some of the themes, but this attitude where you can't make a movie like a Coogan's Bluff, or rather you can't focus on a flawed, relatively more complex character than what appears. There's a bit more depth to Coogan than just a generic smash-em-up action hero. So, a lot to talk about, but you can only talk about it when you make movies like this. And unfortunately, this is a timepiece of an era when cinema really pushed the envelope. It really tried to create controversy, tried to stir things up. Today, things, everybody wants to play it safe because everything's very, very corporate, and that's why you get a lot of boring, same old, same old. And Coogan's Bluff is definitely not boring, and wasn't the same old when it came out in '68, and it still stands out today as something unique and controversial. And if you want to check it out, I advise it. Definitely, if you're an Eastwood fan or a fan of any old-time action star, check it out.